So I'd like to welcome everybody tonight again to our fifth storytelling session. Tonight we have the honor of hearing from Aldo from I'm going to mess up your tribe name again, Yaqui Nation. So he's joining us from California. So I'm going to turn the time over to him. I've already talked and asked him to do a prayer for us and then kind of get into his stories. And so welcome. Thank you again for honoring us with your presence. And we look forward to hearing your story. So take it away. It's all you.
I'm introducing myself in Lakota because these stories are Lakota. And these stories were shared to me growing up. A relative, Albert Whitehat, who passed on, he shared some of these stories with me. And when Steve, my older brother, asked me to share these stories, I said I would. I'm Yoeme, but I grew up in the Lakota country. So these are the things that I know. Before we start, relative asked for this prayer. So I just collect our minds today. And today was pretty significant. I think about Deb Holland moving in and her confirmation into becoming the Department of Interior Secretary, and just seeing that representation, that peace, and all the women in our communities that are always carrying our communities and are the backbone of our people. Thinking about how a lot of times we don't share a lot of stories about the women in our communities. And so today, as we prepare for this, I just want to take a moment of silence to think about all the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls that are out there, all of our relatives. February is Teen Dating Awareness Month. It's to talk a lot of times to our high school kids about what it is to be dating and how to be respectful and mindful to each other. So let's just take a moment to think about our relatives that maybe are having difficulties, or we haven't heard from for a long time, or those because of COVID, we're doing things like this where we miss them. So let's just send them some love. All right. So these two stories I want to share today one's going to be about well, I'll just get into it. One day we're sitting around the table at my dad's house. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. We're sitting around at a house in Rosebud there to the west side, outside of St. Francis in Grass Mountain. And we were visiting around the table, and boys were getting a little rowdy. And the old man, he kind of was watching us and watching our behavior. And people were forgetting themselves, how they were speaking to one another and speaking about the women in their lives. And in one moment, the old man, he said, you guys listen up. Listen up. I want to tell you a story. Auntie was in the kitchen preparing a meal for us. And he said, a long time ago, he said, there's a buffalo hunt. He said all the men and women, they had heard that these buffalo were near. So several of them went out to go look to see where these buffalo were. So in the tall grass, they moved through the plains. Or early morning time. The sky hadn't changed color yet. And there underneath the morning star, they saw these buffalo. And these buffalo were all laying down. As the light started to fill the sky, they could see the breath coming out of these buffalo. As this was happening, they all kind of moved closer, looking. Amongst the men and women there was a particularly young woman there who was carrying on her a knife that had been given to her, and a special knife. This is before the time of metal that was traded, and this particular blade had been made from a meteorite that come from the sky. And in that moment, something came upon her. Something spoke to her. And that young woman stood up and she charged the biggest bull that was there. And she was so swift and so ready that she didn't feel her hand grab her knife. And it took no struggle for that knife to cut through that buffalo's throat. It was so fast that buffalo just fell right where he was. Didn't even move, didn't get up, didn't move his head, nothing. And she was in shock. Just then, a young man was watching her, and the eagle got the best of him. He didn't know how to sit there and just be and prepare for the hunt. He saw what this young woman had done as somehow it was offensive to him. Somehow he wasn't going to be shown up by a woman. His ego, took over, and well, he got up and he ran to the next largest bull. And right when he was upon that bull, he reached back for his knife, and that bull just simply turned his head and it gored him, took his life. And that young man fell. The other buffalo stood up at this commotion, and the herd started to move. And the only buffalo that was left was the one that this young woman had killed. The old man sat there and real careful, like he just took his coffee and he just drank real slow. And he looked at all of us and he said, "Do you understand?" And we were all young men at the time, kind of looked at each other, and we're trying to draw our own corollaries to the story. And he sat there and he said, "Don't let your ego take over and forget about your relatives and the relationships you have." He said, that young man, there was no need for him to get up. His ego cost everyone their meal. He said, what that young woman did was she heard what she had to do and she was prepared to do it. He always talked about being ready for anything. So that young woman was ready and she was special. There was something about her. He said, but that man was selfish and he wanted to take. He said, you boys were here talking and not paying attention about your relatives, your own ego. You're outdoing each other. Here, the women that are around you are taking care of you, and you're not even acknowledging the gift that they're giving you. He said, your auntie is just like that big bull. If you rush in there and you don't show her respect, she's going to drop you right then and there. We all kind of laughed. And he said, I'm not kidding. She's tough. We kind of all chuckled at each other. And he said, remember your relatives are all around you, and remember what you're doing and what you're saying and how you're relating to one another. He said, when we forget that, we forget our role and we forget to be good relatives. He said, that young woman was the best relative that she knew how to be in that moment. Everything she did was selfless. But that young man, he was trying to feed something. He was trying to be seen. He said, so remember that. Sometimes just because you think you're fit for the job doesn't mean you're the right one for it. And those who are prepared and ready, they will be ready for that opportunity. So I really thought about that story because we don't really hear stories like that too often of young women that are so valiant and fearless and that do so many good things for our people. But that's a reality that happens every single day in our homes. The women in our lives are always taking care of us, always being good relatives to us, always being compassionate. And it's oftentimes that we have to remind our brothers. So that's one story. And the next story I want to share with you is about grandmothers and wolves. And all of these stories are kind of intertwined. So one winter, bands were moving across the prairie and they were getting ready to go to winter camp. It just so happens that as they were getting ready to move, this grandmother who had lost most of her family, she had little means. But what she did have was a little dog that she loved so much. And this little dog was still puppy. She had just gotten it, but it was entertaining for her. And it brought her joy to feed him. And she always had a little bit of wasna, a little bit of dried meat with choke cherries in a little bag on her hip. And she would nourish herself with that, and she'd give some to that little dog, a little four-legged. But just as they're getting ready to break down camp, that little dog just takes off, and it's snowing. Snow came early, caught them off guard. So she left her doings to go after this dog. So she's running around looking for this dog everywhere. She's looking through the brush. She's looking through the tall grasses. She's trying to follow the prints in the snow. And pretty soon his grandmother finds that she's lost her way. The soft snow that was falling earlier now came heavy and had covered her tracks. She didn't know what to do. So she went walking and praying and looking and searching. And here pretty soon she came across the cave. The sun was setting, so she figured she'd find shelter and stay warm. So grandmother crawled in this cave, and kind of small cave, and she started crawling, getting to the back of this cave as far as she could away from the wind. She laid down, and she figured maybe she'll die there. She was preparing herself. And as she was ready to have a meal to eat her wasna, she started hearing little yipping. So here pretty soon she looked behind this rock, and there was all these little wolf pups. Must have been a long time ago, because I don't think there's been a wolf normally in that part of the plains since like the early 1900s. Recently they started coming back, so that's good. But in this time there was no horses, and must have been a long time ago. So she was back there, and she was hearing these little wolf pups yipping for food, and their mother was nowhere in sight, and they're kind of pitiful. So that grandmother, she did what all grandmothers do, and she just gave the best of what she had. She figured she might not live, and she might as well just share this food. So here she started feeding those pups that wasna that she carried. Took a little bit for herself, and feeding all those little mouths. All those little dogs were, those little wolf pups were all over her, and she was just loving on them, and kind of brought her some relief because she was missing her own dog. Here pretty soon, just playing with them and feeding them, she grew really tired and she fell asleep. Sometime in the night before the sun come up, that grandmother, she started feeling heat, warm breath on her face. Pretty soon she felt a snout touch her, and something smelt like death. So she opened her eyes, and there in the cave, she could only see a pair of eyes looking at her. The grandmother got quiet, still, didn't move. She could hear what she didn't know what it was at first, but she just heard sniffing. Pretty soon, this muzzle touched her. It was the mother of those wolf pups. And that mother smelled that grandmother up and down, and then smelled her pups. And she could smell that wasna that she had shared in both their mouths and hers, and she knew what that grandmother had done. So that wolf, she took to her cubs, and she was tending to them. They were still kind of in between nursing and eating, and they laid with that grandmother and kept her warm that night. The next day, that wolf cut out and brought back a small rabbit for her to make. And they ended up spending the winter like that. She'd watch the pups, and she'd watch them grow, and that wolf would come and bring food and share together. And they say even over time that grandmother even learned how to speak to them and understand them. And she even began to smell like them. She had been brought into their family. When springtime came, the snows were starting to melt, and the wolves were now bigger. The pups were bigger, and they were going out with their mother and coming back, and the grandmother lingered near the cave, and she'd explore a little bit, but not too far. One day that wolf came back and said, "I found your people. Tomorrow in the morning we'll go. I'll take you to your people." So that grandmother, she prepared her things, and she started to mourn the family that she was going to be leaving behind, this wolf family. But she loved on them, and she went to sleep, and she started dreaming about all her relatives that probably thought she was dead, missing her. So here, just like that wolf had said, in the morning they took off and they started to head west towards that camp. Here slowly they went. And here, as they were getting closer to the valley where her people were, she could smell them. And she said, "What's that smell? It's strong." She said, "I don't know what that smell is." "Those are your people." She had forgotten what they smelled like. And that grandmother crested that ridge, and when she came down, that camp was there, and everyone looked up, and they were just in shock and awe that that grandmother had survived. They had all for sure thought she had perished in the winter snow. And they were equally surprised to see that grandmother being surrounded by wolf pups. Just as she was going back, she looked back at that wolf to say thank you, say goodbye. And that wolf said, "Because you've helped my children, we'll always help you and your people. Call on us when you need us." So she went down and she told the people. And as this happened, she looked back, and the wolves, they howled and went around back over the ridge, back went to their home. Several years later, they say that maybe we had forgotten ourselves. We weren't saying our prayers or being good relatives to the animal nations. So they said there was a great hunger, and the people had no meat to eat, and the animals were gone. And as they started to pray, they remembered that commitment the wolf had made. And when they prayed, the wolves came and answered and brought game back into the valleys. So there's always been that relationship. And I wanted to bring that one up too, the relationship of that grandmother, because it's probably one of the most crucial relationships that we're probably all missing, especially during this time, is we're missing our grandmothers and our grandfathers. We can't visit with them so much, but it's good to remember them and to always take care of them and make time for them. Because that grandmother's generosity, she was also acting selflessly. And as she fed those pups, she never could have imagined that someday they'd have to call on those wolves to help them survive as a people. All she thought was of how to take care of grandchildren like she had taken care of so many before. And all she knew was to give the best of what she had and to show love and compassion, generosity. These are things that are just inherent parts of the women in our communities. And just want to remember everyone about those things, because those are times that we forget. We forget that we should feed each other and we should look after each other and keep each other warm, especially during difficult times like we're facing now. So those are two stories that came to my mind today that I wanted to share with all of you. And then there's finally a third that goes with it. It's a modern story, but also ones that I learned back home. My aunties asked me to share. And this one's just simple, that there was a grandmother who recently lost her husband and she was home. And a social worker was coming to check on her. And the social worker would come and to check on her and make sure she had all she had to eat and she had her medicines and everything else. And the first time the social worker came home, the house was really nice. It's all picked up, really orderly. Smelled good. There was good food. There was warm coffee. And that grandmother was pretty content. Several weeks later, the social worker came to check on this grandmother. And as she did, the social worker noticed that there were some things missing in her home. Furniture, things were a little bit disheveled, wasn't as much food. She said, "Grandmother," she said, "notice that some things changed here in your house. What happened?" She said, "Oh." She said, "Oh, nothing." She said, "My grandson, he needed some things. So he took the things he needed. And I gave him some food and whatnot so he could take care of himself. And well, he's off doing his things now. Social worker kind of said, okay. A little while went by and she came back and she's looking around and noticed more things are gone. More things are gone. She said, huh. So she asked that grandmother again. She said, last time I was here, I noticed that there were some changes. What's going on? I noticed that there's more things missing now. Oh, well, nephew, nephew grandson there's having a hard time. So he came in and he got a few things that he needed. And, he went off and he's living his life and he's doing things. So, it's what we do. Third time that social worker came over, she noticed that house was pretty much bare and there was hardly anything left in it. So, what's going on? She said, where's all your things? And grandmother, she replied, she said, well, grandson, he needs some help. He needs some things. So here she was just sitting in a chair drinking her coffee. I said, well, you can't do that. She said, you got to tell him no. You got to establish boundaries. You got to come and you got to set the bars. This is unfair. This isn't right. And that social worker really laid into that grandmother. And that grandmother drank her coffee and she listened. She listened to what she had to say. And she said, why don't you tell him something? And the social worker was taken back and she said, what do you mean, why don't I? She says, well, it's a responsibility of our community. Took a look after our relatives and to raise our children and grandchildren. She says, my responsibility as a grandmother to just take care and love my grandchildren, to show them compassion. It's not mine to tell them to suffer or to watch them suffer. That's not my role. And I oftentimes think about that too with our relatives, that sometimes we forget ourselves, especially during these times that are difficult. When we're looking at our relatives, especially our elders and grandparents, and especially now that it's so hard, we're all so far away from each other and alone. These difficult things happen. But the corollary between all those stories is about being prepared and being compassionate and being generous and living from our heart and being mindful and being good relatives. So those are the stories that came to my mind as we were preparing for this talk today. And I know that we had talked about having some question and answer sessions in here and to explore that or continue with other stories because there's so many stories to tell. I want to make sure that I leave time for all of that and to see if there's something in the community that maybe there's a story we're looking for in the community or someone that it triggered someone to share. Because I think that's important too, as we reach into our memory banks and we pull out these stories, as we're remembering how stories are told in our community. And, I could go all around Rosebud or all around Pine Ridge or everywhere, and these stories will be a little bit different. And it's not that it's wrong that how it's told there, but it's because the needs change within our community. So I'm sure that the stories of the wolves, stories about how to be good relatives, those stories are interwoven in our people's tradition and how we share them. And I know that oftentimes it'll trigger a memory. So I want to give enough time for that too here as we're talking today. Oh, so Brother Steve asked me to explain Wicha Agli, a little separate than the stories, but Wicha Agli is an organization that we founded in Rosebud. Wicha is short for Wichasha. Agli is the word to come home. And the way we look at that is saying we're bringing our men home. Wicha Agli was founded to address domestic and sexual violence on our reservation, particularly addressing men's behavior. So in our program, we offer a 26-week curriculum focused on working with cognitive behavioral issues around domestic violence, helping men explore why they chose to use violence, helping men understand how to be better relatives and how to listen more to the community, particularly to the women and children in our communities, so that we can be better relatives to one another. So we've been in operation for 6 years on the Rosebud, and we work directly with the domestic violence shelter and with probation in the court systems to help those men who have been convicted of domestic violence find how they could better themselves. We also work with the children in our communities. We have equine facilitated mental health. We work with the Horse Nation to provide healing for those children that were affected by domestic or sexual violence. We also work in the schools and in local community events to try and help our community heal from all of the historical and transgenerational trauma that we faced. So is there anybody that has any questions, or you want another story, or look over to you, Echo Hawk?
Yeah, you can use the chat too if you want to ask some questions about maybe the work that is done or a little bit more about the stories.
Another story, Veronica? Okay.
Nicole, did you have a question? I saw you came on the.
Hello, I just wanted to say hello to you. Thank you for sharing your stories. I'm listening from my car right now.
Awesome.
I think it's really good to hear them. It's a good way for us really to share with our kids. I'd love to have you come join us virtually with some of our youth group stuff too as well. So I'll be reaching out to you for sure.
I'll be happy to visit whenever. It's good to see you. Yeah. What's it? Okay. So another story. You guys want to, well, I don't know. Have you guys been talking a lot about Iktomi stories?
We haven't really heard any Iktomi stories. In the past 5, the first session was about the importance of storytelling. The second one, another one, we got into Omaha and Ponca, the history of, how they got to be where they were. And then Jerome got to talk about, Kills Small talked about his experience in living through the blizzard of 1947 or 8 or one of those, and how it related to the COVID pandemic as far as like being separated and stuff like that. But other than that, we haven't heard any Iktomi stories. So,
all right. Well, let me throw in there an Iktomi story, because some of these stories, they can be fun and they can be challenging and they can make you think on a lot of different levels. So for those of you guys who don't know, Iktomi is a lot of times referred to as a spider, but Iktomi is much more than a spider. Iktomi is actually had an older name, a name known as Kasa. And in Lakota, when you look at the word for wisdom, Oksape, Kasa is in that word, and it has to do with relationship and knowing the relationships between everything. And Iktomi knew all those relationships, and he also got caught up. He had hurt feelings. People were bullying him, so he decided to play a trick on the spirits, and they kind of punished him. So since that time, he has been the teacher of mistakes, through folly, through humility. He's had to be humbled a bunch of times. So this is a story. There's 2 stories. I'm going to combine the 2 because they're normally told all winter long. Like this is the biggest part of our storytelling in the winter time, is when we see Diomede, when we see Orion's belt in the sky, and Orion's belt starts to make a transition, it then becomes a hand. And during that time, we can start telling all kinds of good stories. And this is one of them. And this story here is Iktomi and the Ducks. And this is something that we got to see play out on the world stage, but we all got to see in our own lives. So long time ago, Iktomi was walking and he was really hungry. His stomach was growling, making all kinds of sounds, how stomachs make. And Iktomi is walking with a big bag on his back, and on his back, he keeps his songs. So when he hears songs, he puts them in his back and he just keeps walking, doing his thing. He was hungry and he didn't know what to do. And he's just sitting there and his arms are coming down all kinds of ways. And pretty soon he heard these ducks. Ducks are getting together and they're all along the river and they come on shore. It's getting nighttime. Ducks are coming on. So Domi has an idea. He sees them all and he kind of is watching them. He says, "What are you doing? What are you all doing?" And Duck says, "We're getting ready for the night. We're getting ready for the night." He says, "Oh," he says, "what'd be good is if we made a fire and we all we sung some songs. I got some good songs back here. Probably want to hear them. I don't know, maybe. I don't know." So here that lead duck, he said, "Really?" He says, "You got some good songs?" He says, "Oh yeah, I got the best ones." He said, "I want to hear them. I want to hear them. What do you guys think?" Everybody wants to hear the songs. He said, "Well, I got a special song, really special one." He said, "You know what makes it special?" He's like, "There's a dance that goes with it." Ducks that go, "Oh, we like to dance. We like to dance. Well, what's it? What do we do? What do we do?" And he says, "Well, let's build us a frame, a little hut." Pretty soon they're grabbing brush and they're piling up and they're making a little space for him. He says, "Okay." He says, "I'm gonna go inside there." He says, "I'm gonna start singing." He said, "Can you guys start dancing on your way in?" He's like, "And I'll be singing, and as you come in," he says, "you got to keep dancing." He said, "And I'll show you how that dance is inside once you get in there." He said, "But don't open your eyes. You gotta guys keep your eyes closed. It's a big part of it, because if you do, your eyes will turn red." Ducks are all excited. Fire's burning. Little hut, it's all covered up, dark in there. Domi crawls in there with his bag of songs. He drags it in, puts his song back. Ishtag moose, wachipo, Ishtag moose, wachipo. And he's singing. He's saying, keep your eyes closed and keep dancing, dancing. Pretty soon the ducks are going in. Ducks are going in. Ducks are going in the house. Here they're all lining up and they're going in. One of the ducks, he just wasn't very trustworthy of Iktomi. He had heard some things about him, being a trickster and all. So right as he about to went in, he's putting his in, he opens his eyes and he just sees Iktomi singing this song and he's got a big old, his drumstick, his big chabo, he's just hitting the ducks on the head. Coming in, boom, just killing the ducks. So he turns around and he says, "Open your eyes, open your eyes." He's like, "Tomi's killing us. Tomi's killing us." Pretty soon all the ducks start to flap their wings, they start to fly off, and pretty soon all their eyes, they turn red. He said that's why ducks' eyes are red. But sometimes people finish the story there. And they'll tell you about how you don't follow leadership blindly. You have your own mind and you watch. And then you make decisions about how to live your life. Because if not, someone might take advantage of you because you might be too trusting or too naive or not know. But that's not where the story ends. Depends on who you ask. There might be 16, 24, maybe 28 of these stories. They're all important. And where the story gets fun is later that night. Because see, as the ducks flew away, Iktomi was so satisfied with what he had done. He's sitting there laughing and all of his arms are just kind of going everywhere and he's chuckling. And all of his arms are moving and they're grabbing ducks and he's laying these ducks out. And his mouth is just watering. And he's getting wood and he's stacking the wood. Fire is pretty big. He brushes the coals away from the fire and he digs a little bit. He starts putting the coals in that little pit and he puts earth on top. Here he gets these ducks and he lays them on there and he puts coals on them. Then he's got so many ducks, so he's got sticks and he's got ducks on there, and they're all cooking, and the grease is dripping. And Hitomi's just happy. He's just sitting there. It's gonna be so good. And he's getting there and he's watching everything cook, and it's just the smell of those ducks. He's just And just as he's getting ready to eat, he's seeing this one duck that's just on there and it's just cooked and it's so good. And he's about to eat into it. He hears this noise. What is that noise? He's looking around. He puts that duck down and hearing these sounds. Looks up, he said, and it's these tree branches that were crossed. The wind would blow and the tree branches would make noises. And Hitomi looked at the tree and he said, come on. He said, can you guys be quiet? I'm trying to eat. The trees didn't answer. Hitomi said, talk to the wind. Ask the wind to stop. But the wind didn't stop. It kept blowing and the trees kept creaking and making noises, branches. So Hitomi said, all right, I'm going to climb up there and I'm going to push those trees apart. Hitomi climbs. And he goes over there and he starts pushing those tree branches apart. Pretty soon those branches are coming apart and they're on, the wind's blowing, and pretty soon Hitomi's got one hand up there, he's got another one up there. He might even have a foot, holding those branches back. Just then the big wind blows and all the branches come back. And now Hitomi's all stuck up there. Legs, arms, all kinds of ways. He's stuck between all of these branches. They got him pinned. Man, he's just mad. He's just drooling for he wants to eat. He hasn't eaten all day. He took all that kind of energy to kill all those ducks, but then he's got it all around him and it's just smelling so good. And he's stuck up there and he just starts to scream, help, help, oh Makiayo, help. Somebody come out. And a character from earlier in the story comes by. The wolves hear him. The wolves hear him crying out. They come smelling all the commotion. And the wolves get there and they look up and they see Hitomi and they say, Hitomi, what are you doing in that tree? And he says, I'm stuck. I'm stuck and I was going to eat my dinner. I was going to eat all those ducks down there. He says, look at them. They're good. They've been cooking. So hungry. And the wolves looked and then they looked back up at him. Pretty soon, those wolves started taking those ducks in their mouths and moving away. Hitomi started crying, and the wolves started howling and laughing at him, ridiculing him, shaking their heads. And here they had taken all of those ducks that they could see. He said, thank you for feeding us tonight. He said, we'll sing for you. You'll hear us and we'll sing for you. And Hitomi, being clever, he says, hi. He says, you think you got all my ducks, huh? And that wolf, he looked over and he says, yeah. He said, that's what you know, but you didn't know that I put some in the fire. And Hitomi thought to himself, why did I say that? Here, the dogs, the wolves, they started pawing. Pretty soon they dug up all those ducks and they got those too and they left. Oh, now he's really crying. He's really sad. But he was boastful. His fault. Just then, as the wolves had left, the fire had burned down, and the ducks were all gone, the wind blew. The branches separated, and Hitomi just came tumbling down and fell in that fire and took off. So, these Hitomi stories are really important. They teach us about life in so many ways. In that way, that trickster becomes our teacher. In that way, we can see ourselves and how sometimes we forget ourselves. Sometimes we all have a little bit of that trickster inside of us. Sometimes we have a little bit of that wolf inside of us. Sometimes we have a little bit of that duck inside of us. So these things that we're talking about are important so that we have our minds can wrap around what's happening. We can look at Hitomi and remember that maybe we should be better relatives, not be so tricky to people, not take advantage of people. Also reminds us not to be taking advantage of, or not to be boastful, or to let things go that aren't really important. Someone said here, moral of the story, don't eat ducks. I don't know, ducks are pretty good. I eat them. To each his own. Everyone has the right to do what they want. And but man, that duck, when the grease is going, that's yummy. But that's the stories that we know about the duck's eyes turning red, about that wolf. You know, those wolves got to come back. And that's, I think, the biggest part of our stories too, is as we share stories, we get to see our relatives come in and out of our stories, and we're reminded about how we're related to creation. You know, back in those days, you know, we were always we were living in nature, so we got to see nature. And a big part of our lives in Nebraska and South Dakota is that we still get that, right? We know where our food comes from. We know what grows in the earth. We can see that. We see the cranes and the geese flying back and forth. We don't forget. And I think it's a big important part of our stories is we remember we're tied to it, because a lot of people forget that we're tied to creation. We're tied to the earth. You know, there was a few years ago where we were fighting the Keystone Pipeline. Back 2014, we were fighting that in South Dakota, and you know, Chie was really helpful in that. My Misunkala Greg was really helpful in that. A lot of relatives from Nebraska, a lot of relatives from Ponca Nation, Omaha Nation, Lakotas, Cheyennes, Anishinaabe folk. You know, people came from all over. And now here we've held up enough resistance that hasn't come through our land and poisoned our water. We weren't so lucky with Dakota Access, or Line 3 Enbridge is happening now. But through our stories, remember that we're all connected, and that anything that affects the nature is going to affect us directly. So it's important to tell these stories, remember how to be good relatives, and how to think for ourselves, how to take care of ourselves, and how to love each other in a really good way. So yeah, hopefully you guys like that story. I'm getting messages. People are hungry.
I had a comment. So my little one came home today after school, and it made me think about how I was talking to him, because he was kind of pouty when he got in the car, and his brother was asking him what was wrong, and he was like, nothing. And I said, well, what's wrong? What happened? Nothing. And I said, well, how come you're acting that way then? You sound like there's something wrong with you. So then he told us a long story about they have a daily snack, and there's a couple people missing today, and there were some extras, and a few of them wanted some, and there was only a couple that were available that they could get extra. And so they were playing a game to see who won it, could like pop, or I think they were playing rock, paper, scissors, and whoever won could get the extra ones. Well, one of the little girls, when they were in line before they said that they had extra, had gotten two of them. And when he said, oh, she got two, the teacher asked her, and she said, no, I only have one, but she had put one in her pocket. And he was like, she was lying. And he was really upset that she was lying about it. And then he had lost the game, and so he was still upset that she was lying when the teacher asked her again. And then he lost the game to get that one extra one that was left. And I told him, I said, well, it's not good for her to lie, but maybe she needed that food more than everybody else did today. Maybe she doesn't have what she needed at home right now, and she needed that extra snack. And I said, you're lucky that you don't have to worry about that. You know that you have food at home when you go home to eat it. I said, it's okay to be upset because it's not good to lie. I said, but maybe she was embarrassed and didn't want to say that. And that's okay too. That's not for you to tell her. But I also told him, it's okay to be upset because you didn't win. Because he said, well, I was sad and I was really frustrated. She was lying to the teacher. And I said, well, like I said, maybe she needed that more. And you're okay. You should be just thankful that you have enough to go home to. And like if you come home and tell me oh mom, I didn't get this, I can tell you, oh, I can pick you some up at the store when I go again. And we're lucky to be able to do that. Maybe she's not. So, it shows, those stories tell the importance of explaining things. And it made me it made me think of him and his little story. He was so sad he didn't get that extra pineapple today. But it also, he thought about it and he was like, yeah, it's okay that I didn't win. I know I can't always win it, but also validating each other's feelings and saying it's okay to feel that way, but not to get stuck in it. So it just made me think of that.
No, I think that that's a super useful examination there and reflection. I think that you taking the time to acknowledge what he went through and give him the presence of mind to look at his relatives from a more compassionate place, that's beautiful teaching. So I think that that is really amazing, that you had the presence of mind to do that. And those are things that we need to constantly remember, because we're all caught up in our own struggles as parents, as teachers, as educators, and then to take the time to look into his world and to see where he was at and to bring him a teaching that's going to make him more compassionate and more open-hearted is really beautiful. So thank you for that too. Let's see what else is going on here. So is there any other questions you guys have for me? We got a little bit of time left. I think there's 10 minutes left on the clock here.
Yeah, we got about 10 minutes. So if anybody has any questions, you can go ahead and ask, or kind of like he was saying before, if it triggered a thought of some kind or an emotion or something, it's good to express those too. And I think that's kind of sometimes the power of storytelling, is that it kind of helps to heal sometimes too, things that makes and touches your heart and your mind, and kind of be able to express it and get validated that other people kind of feel that way too, and then you kind of keep moving forward in that way. So if anybody wants to don't eat ducks, that's another one that came up. So
Sid Wakefield, yeah. Veronica's asking for another story. We have time for another story? You guys want to hear one more story, a quick one? You guys want to hear a story? Let's see, I'll put it this way. You guys want to hear a story about eagles? A story about woodpeckers?
Are we allowed to eat those though?
Woodpeckers and eagles? I wouldn't eat eagles, but they make a medicine that's pretty rare. They have been used. Steve, no. What's a good story? All right, well, do you guys know the flute story? Is that a story you guys want to hear about? Since Valentine's Day happened and all of that, we'll throw one out there. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna go grab this flute and I'll be right back.
while he's getting that, that's going to kind of get us up to 6 o'clock. And so I'd like to appreciate everybody here for coming. Next week, we'll be hearing from Sophia Ford. She's a younger Anishinaabe who's going to come and share some traditional Ojibwe stories. And so that'll be next Wednesday. And so just to kind of throw that in there. So turn it back over to Aldo.
Awesome. It's really beautiful. You guys are doing this too. Thank you guys so much for providing these opportunities for stories. So it's really super important. Well, I'll be quick about it. Joseph Marshall III has a beautiful story, and Kevin Locke have beautiful stories around the flute. Their stories are much better than mine. But I'll give you a short condensed version since we don't have too much time. So the Wajo Hokagapi, the flute, or the thing that makes the noise, has been a cording instrument for a long time. And they used to be made out of cedar predominantly. And there's a couple of stories of how they came to be. One story is that the southern one, Okaga, crafted this to give to his wife Wope and put his 5 brothers, the winds, because there's 5 winds in Lakota. There's Iya, there's Yata, there's Yampa, there's Okaga, and Yoeme. And there's a, so that's well, technically it's supposed to be in the west, but he got moved to the north, um, north and the east and the south. And the little one is Chance and Love. And these five brothers live in this instrument, and we use it for those that we care about. And there was a story long ago, kind of goes that in the summer times camps would come together, and one of these summers, this young man, this young woman, they really liked each other. And every year they would look forward to when their camps would come together. And every year they would look for each other in the tall grass and when they were cleaning things. And they, as they got older, they started to have feelings. They wanted to maybe seek a relationship to each other. But as time went on, a summer had come together where their camps had come together, and he noticed that there was a new teepee near her family's, and that something was different in the air. So just like normal, he went to go see their family and scratch on their teepee, and he scratched on the teepee of her mothers and fathers, because he didn't recognize this other teepee. They said she wasn't home, that she had her own lodge, and that she had been married off. And this young man, he just mourned, he cried, he sobbed, because he was of the age now where he could bring horses to her father and ask for her hand in marriage. So they said he started taking off. This young man took off, and he got to the river's edge, and there she was standing. She had been washing some things, and she looked up at him and said, why are you so sad? And she said, well, you've been promised to another. You have your own home, you live life. And she said, yes. She said, my father found a good man for me, and we're making a home together. And she said, but I don't understand why you're hurt. And she said, because we had made promises to each other, because I loved you. She looked at him and she said, what are the promises of young children to the cold winters? What are the promises of being able to eat when you haven't proven yourself as a hunter? Who are you to me in that way? She says, I do love you and I care about you, but I have to think about life. We're getting older now. There's responsibilities, taking care of children. What are we going to do? He ran all day until the sun was setting, and he was so tired, he just fell down. And he fell down in this tree grove, crying, and he just went to sleep. Now, as he was sleeping there, the wind would blow, and he was cold, and he just leaned against that tree and hear that wind would blow. Pretty soon he'd hear a sound. And it was sad, and it was coming when the wind would come, and it kind of eased his heart because it was sad like him. So he listened to it some more. So then he went looking for it all day. The next day he woke up looking for this sound that sounded like his heart, just mournful. And he looked and looked and looked. Pretty soon, way up high on the cedar tree was a branch. And there, on top of this branch, was this little woodpecker pecking away. And the wind would blow and he'd be pecking away. Pecking away. So he looked up to that woodpecker and he said, hey, can I have that? Can I have that branch? The one that's making noise? Woodpecker looked down at him, looked at it, looked down at him. So there's no more bugs in it, so you can go ahead and have it. He climbed and he broke it off. It's hollow. And he grabbed it. He said, I have this now. This is going to help me. Couldn't figure out how to make it make sound. How does it make sound? He wondered. Finally, he grabbed it. And that song soothed him so much. He just walked and he played. It was sad like him. And he played so much with his eyes closed that pretty soon he felt wet. He looked down and he's down at the river, right next to the village. The same place he had that conversation with that young woman he loved. As this happened, as things happened, she happened to be right by the water, right where he left. And she said, why is that so sad? What do you have there? He says, my hokagapi. It makes noise. It's a thing that makes, I don't know, wajo, flute, I don't know, makes noise. She said, does it make any happy sounds? And no, it only plays what's in my heart. And my heart's sad because you've chosen another. She said, don't be sad anymore. Because after seeing you cry, I thought about how many winters I would be without you. And I spoke to my husband, and we decided that it would be best that I stay with you and live life with you. And he got so happy. His heart was so filled with love that he just grabbed his flute and started playing. And ever since that time, young men are giving these flutes to learn how to create a song that they will give to someone that they care about. But if it wasn't for that little woodpecker looking for food and preparing this instrument, we would never have this. And because of that, the woodpecker is a symbol of love. And when you watch it flying, going and falling and going up again, looking with its ears and not with its eyes, that woodpecker is telling us about how love is and how to ride that waves that come from our heart and how to be able to tend to our family and to ourselves and to those we love. So ever since that time, we've been using a flute and when we court and when we look for relationships. And it's a time to be able to bring the voice of our hearts out into the world. So that's a story for you I wanted to share about woodpeckers. So hopefully you guys liked them. I appreciate all the time you've given me. I apologize if I offended anybody. I look forward to seeing what you do with this and jumping on next week and catching that next video. It sounds pretty interesting. And again, thanks for all the educators and the parents and the families that are putting things like this together to help us feel a little bit more normal and to give us a little bit more support during these difficult times.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your stories. You know, everybody in the chat is commenting how much they enjoyed it. So thank you. And Navajo, you know, I get it, you know, for saying that. And so I'm kind of from that Southwest region too. So I don't know if there's any other questions anybody wants to close out with, or a thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Wopila. Thank you for everything. Dok Shake. See you guys again.